Welcome to the next stage. Now it's time to start the planking of the deck. To do this, it's mainly done with strips such as these, which were provided in the kit. There are 35 of them, about 42 centimeters long, and they're 2 millimeters wide by 1 millimeter thick. And the design calls for the strips to go along the sides, bending and taking the curve of the hull from the front to the end. Now, the first thing to do is to add a pre-made piece, which came with the kit in the 1 millimeter sheets, which is meant to go back here. The problem with this piece is that the edges of it don't quite fit the ship. This probably means that with all the sanding and everything, it's not exactly the same as what it should be, according to the plans. Only differs a little bit. So what I've gone ahead and done is to make a pattern of the stern and to create a new one. This will also enable that the ends are going to be 2 millimeters wide, just like the planks, so I can add it on. The way that I did was to make the template in paper, cut the paper, and then glue it onto part of the wood that came with the kit, and then cut it out using an X-Acto knife and sanding it down. A bit rough for the time being, but what I will do, I've marked the middle of it and I will glue it down like this, so it's centered. And then when I put more planks and everything, and when I sand it with a little bit of water, the paper should peel off pretty easily. So that's the first stage to do before adding the planks, and probably starting off on the outside and then work my way in. So that's the first plan with this new piece. Sand it down a little bit more so it looks less rough, and glue it down with wood glue, and that should cover the first step. Okay, now that the rear part of the deck is glued in, I've gone ahead and added the first strip along the side. The way that I've done this is I've glued it with wood glue, but before doing that I left the strip for about 12 hours in water to make it flexible and be able to bend as well as possible. To hold it down, I went ahead and used these modified map pins. What I've done with them is to actually glue one piece of the first planking with super glue to put a stop to it, and then I just pinned them down, and this has helped to actually hold the plank down into its place. There's a tiny bit up front that still has to be fitted because one whole plank didn't fit. But before I do that, I'll add the other one on this side, and when that's dry, I can actually add these two little parts. So that's the beginning of it, and from then onwards, I'll be planking from the outside towards the middle, and that should begin the planking of the deck. So until the next step, I'll be back. Okay, now it's on to the next stage, which is planking the center line of the deck. And here I've deviated from the original plans, following some of the designs of other people that have done the same model on YouTube and other sites on internet, which is to actually use the planks from the second planking to do this center line. Since the original planking is only 0.5 of millimeter and the rest of the planking is 1 millimeter, what I've gone ahead and done is using two of the planks, I've glued them together, and this is the result. It's pretty easy, just using wood glue. And then I've gone ahead and used two of them here in the back, and I'll use two more up front here and glue them down to create the center line, cutting off the front to make sure that it fits with the edge of the outer planks, and I'll glue them down. These planks are 3 millimeters wide, and in comparison the normal planks are only 2, so by adding 2 of them I'll have 6 millimeters instead of the 4 that I should have according to the instructions, but the effect I think will be pretty nice to have the comparison with the normal white glue of the rest of the planks until they get to the middle. So the next job will be to glue the front part of these planks down, and then I'll start planking the rest to fill in from the edge to here with the normal planks, and we'll see the effect of that. Okay, now on to the next part, which is creating the planking to fill in the gaps between the edge and the middle. I've already done half of it, and I have to do the other half. So the first part is to grab one of the strips and cutting it down into 10 centimeter pieces. I have a template here, and to do that all I do is just line them up, and with a razor I cut it down to the correct length. There's one, there's two. Pretty easy to cut them off with the razor, making sure that they're all more or less the same length. There's three, and finally a fourth one right here. And there I have four and a little piece which is left over. These are good to use to fill in the ends, and therefore I have enough of them. Then once I do that, I put them together into a bunch of four, hold them down with clothes peg on one side, and then with a pencil, which I've cut off and left only the graphite, what I go ahead and do is scrape it along the edge to create an image representing the caulking, and this way I end up with all the pieces I need. Takes a while to cover the whole area, but goes down pretty quickly. More or less, this is an impression of what it will look like, and then I can go ahead and start adding them. I add them in a specific order, starting at the joint between the fake deck planking of the first part and the second part. That's the line that I use, and they should cover 4 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, from this frame to this frame. I have the lines marked, and that's where they should cover, but I stagger them. The first one starting here, the second one starting at the third point, and then going back to the second point, and then going back to the beginning, and that way it creates a staggered effect. I'll keep on creating some of these planks and the fake caulking, and then I'll go ahead and start gluing them down. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is glue the strip. What I first do is to make sure that there's no gap between the first plank and the one that I'm adding. I run the X-Acto blade with the blunt edge outwards, just making sure and pushing it down, and making sure that there's no pieces of glue from the previous stage. And then I test fit the piece, just pushing it into place. With this step I'm not using any glue, but it fits okay, and it's just a matter of making sure that it pushes in. If the join is not perfect, then what I do is I just sand it down a little bit, and then mark it again with the pencil as if it were the caulking. So when I do that, I just grab the piece, and with a little bit of wood glue on a piece of paper, I add it on with a toothpick, just as I did with the other planking, just smearing a little bit of it onto the plank, little by little. With its toothpick, it enables me not to overdo the amount and be able to control it a little bit better. Doing it quickly, since this wood glue gives you about 5 minutes working time, and then it starts becoming very rubbery and it doesn't stick as well. So just quickly down the line, and also with the join with the plank that I put on previously. Just right there a little bit, smear it off, and now I just get the plank, smearing a bit the outsides, and I push it into place, just like that, and trying to get it to bend to the curve. Now the important thing is to make sure that it sticks as close as possible to the previous one, and pushing it downwards. Also, an important step is to, with the X-Acto knife, make sure to clean off the glue that seeps out from underneath. Just going like this. And scraping it down the whole length of the plank. Again, doing it quickly before the wood glue starts becoming hard, and that way making it harder to scrape off. If there's any hard part right there, just trying to smoothing it out. Once I've done that, I push the plank as tightly as possible, and using offcuts from the first planking, I push it down more or less in the middle, and using a mat pin like before, I push it down and keep it in place. I do that in 3 different spots to make sure that there's no gap between the two planks. And one at the front, right here. And if there's any glue seeping out, just scraping it off, scraping it off with my finger. And the last one. And that way I make sure it's tight as possible. And it looks that way. To make sure that no glue interferes with the next plank, I go ahead and clean out the little part here. And that way I make sure that it's all on. So I'll keep on doing that with the whole planks, another whole plank here and another whole plank here, and that will bring me little gaps that with smaller pieces of plank left over, I can fill them in. But first I'll put those two, and then I'll show you how I finish off the final gaps. Okay, now that I've put all the rest of the pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little piece at the end, it's time to do the front one, which means that a whole piece will not fit, but using one of them, all I have to do is line it up as close as possible to the edge and making sure that it goes all the way to the gap there, and then I mark it where it intersects with the brown plank right there, and I put a little mark. So all I have to do is with the razor blade go ahead and cut it into a wedge shaped triangle. And then to make sure that it goes in okay, I just sand it down a little bit. And I test fit it to see if it fits snugly. And seeing that it does, first try, perfect. Then I wrap it around, trying to push it in, and I put another mark at where the plank should join the other one. Doing this, I again take it out and cut it along that line, reserving the extra piece of plank for later on, and also sanding it down a little bit to make it flush. And now I test it again, making sure to see if it fits or if it's too long, but in this case it fits in perfectly. So now what I do is, since I've sanded off the pencil mark, I just mark down the pencil mark right here, and at the back and make sure that everything is there. And all I have to do now is to glue it down, same way I did with the other one, holding it there, and that will complete the first line of planks. And I have 15 rows more to go, and that should make it equal to the other side. So I'll keep on doing that, creating more plank pieces, and obviously, as I said, starting here as I did with this one, the next one will start down here, the next one here, and then back to the beginning, and that way it will create this pattern as on the other side. And that should take care of the planking of the deck. Okay, the deck planking is now complete. I've put all the rows. In total, there are 32 rows, 16 on each side. And the only modification of the original strips of the 2mm is one of the sides. On this right side, I had to use some of the first planking pieces, which were 3mm, and sanded them down because the gap that ended up on this side was about 0.5 millimeter too wide. So instead of adding just one small extra plank, which would be just a piece, I sanded down 2 of the pieces and put them in. What I've done afterwards is to actually sand it down with the provided sand block. Still needs a little bit more sanding, but for the time being I'm just going to leave it this way, and that way it's left it all smooth, ready to add the deck features and the deck furniture. I've also cut out the hole for the mast and for the main cabin. To do that, I've used some files, a round one for deck, for the mast part, pretty easy just to sand it down that way, and left a nice hole to make sure that it's the 6mm that the plans required. I've used this to test it out, and it's exactly 6mm, so that's okay. And the rear part, using a flat one, I've actually gone ahead and sanded down the edges, more or less leaving it to the original pattern. And when I make that piece, I can test it out to make sure that it fits correctly. So this is the end result of the ship until this point. And with this, the hull is pretty much complete. So I'll leave that to one side and start working on the next stage. Will be the deck's furniture, the 6 pieces that are here, as well as the stand, so it's not bumping around. But for the time being, this is the completed hull, and it's worked out pretty nice for all the rest of the pieces that have to be added. So the next stage will be the deck furniture, and I'll start off with that and add it on. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you on the next part.